December virtual lecture series. The theme of our series this year is confronting today's key issues. I want to welcome two new members. I hope everybody's doing well. First member I want to welcome is Guillermo Gutierrez, Emeritus Professor of Medicine, Anesthesiology, and Critical Care Medicine, and of Engineering. And Christopher Lineberger, Emeritus Research Professor of Urban Real Estate. So welcome to the two of you. We have a very special speaker today. I want to remind everybody of the Zoom rules, which is to stay muted and use the hand raise option for questions. It's best to be in the presenter view if you can, to see the best of the Zoom presentation. And with that, I want to introduce President George Bazzini, who is the president of the Society of the Emeriti and Associate Professor Emeritus of English, to introduce our speaker. Unfortunately, folks, I'm going to have to take off early today, but Cassandra will be your steady guide for the remainder of the session. And with that, I want to hand things over to George.
Good morning, SOTE members. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to note the passing on September 12th of Jan Orenstein, Emeritus Professor of Pathology, who also directed the Diagnostic Research Electron Microscopy Laboratory. Dr. Orenstein joined the GW staff in 1977. His specialties included HIV/AIDS research. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Charles Toftoy, one of our own. Charles Toftoy, Chuck, has worked in three sectors: military for 20 years, corporate for 12 years, and academe for 17 years. He is a highly decorated Vietnam veteran who served 2 tours in that conflict. His doctorate is in strategic planning, and he was awarded an MBA from Tulane University and a BS in engineering from West Point. At GW, Professor Toftoy was director of the Entrepreneurial Small Business Program. He has written numerous articles and has appeared on many TV and radio shows, notably on Voice of America, throughout 32 countries. He has written 3 novels and a self-help motivational book. In his presentation today, Professor Toftoy will discuss his latest book, Blunders: Shocking Mistakes That Altered History.
Well, thank you, George. You're really kind. Cassandra, do you want to get it up, or do you want me to try to get those slides up?
Whatever's easiest for you, George. If you'd like me to, or Chuck, if you'd like me to, I can.
Okay, let me see. Cassandra and I met a few days ago, by the way, at her office. So we coordinated a few things. Okay, trying to get it up. See, what's happened is the screen, wait a minute, here. Okay. Looks like it's coming up now. The screen is sort of blocked. Hang on, everybody. I don't know, Cassandra, can you get it up?
Sure, let me give it a shot.
Okay. Done a number of these, haven't really had any difficulty with it, but there we go.
Let's see.
You got it now?
Trying.
Okay. I think you had it there. Should I hit share screen?
Yes.
Okay. Ooh, boy, we had it. Okay.
Here we go.
Um,
I've got it. Can
there,
everybody
there,
see?
there. We finally got it. Okay.
All right.
Anyway, that's slide one. Actually, what it is, there's one slide per blunder. So we'll take it from there. Noteworthy is that the title Blunders is spelled with two N's. That's by design. I'm going to read something verbatim out of like about the third page in the book so that we all are in the same frame of reference. This novel is not necessarily based on the author's viewpoint. That's me. Rather, it's an attempt to show you how many events in history did not have to happen. Many of those blunders were due to dumb decisions, poor communications, and the lack of able leadership. It's set in logic, supported by sufficient facts, probably unknown to you. It's not Monday morning quarterbacking, hindsight, 2020 vision, afterthought, retrospect, or see, I told you so. Those basically are cop-outs. Instead, this is about terrible, chilling, horrific events in our world's history that could have been avoided. Okay, that's a quote from the beginning. That's to set the reader right in the same frame of reference as myself. I got the idea to write this book because I discovered so many missing parts and inaccuracies about important historical events. So the purpose is to provide the general public with real truths, which they deserve. And I really mean that. That's why I did this. That's why it took 6 years to research and write this book. Real eye openers. They went through archives, books, journals, discussion groups, interviews, diaries, top secret messages. I've got a top secret executive information fact sheet from Gorbachev, for example. Internet, researched over 100 blunders. You may feel like you know a blunder that probably should have been included in here, but I pretty well scanned them out. The ones that are basically impacted, major impact on history. The setting and the main characters. The Alpha Team characters, some of you are familiar with them. In the 2 mystery thrillers that I wrote a few years ago, the Alpha Team was in that, helping the local police solve a cold case. Then that was followed by a self-help book. And they meet every Friday morning at 8 o'clock. Now, remember, the characters are fictional, but I'd rather have this in a dialogue form where they're talking using their own presentation style, so that it's not like the author talking down to the reader. So Metro 29 is a diner in Arlington off Langston Boulevard, used to be Lee Highway, for a working breakfast at 8 o'clock. And one character of the Alpha Team leads the discussion. Lars Nielsen, he founded the Alpha Team, professor at GWU, yes, part-time sleuth, 2 Vietnam tours. Brenda Little, a reporter for the Washington Post, black belt in Taekwondo. That came in handy in a couple of the preceding books. Nathan Tiger Green, ex-sergeant U.S. Army, helped his father in New Orleans, where he was born, with the family-owned funeral service, home service. And he's now the associate director of Murphy Funeral Home. If you know where that is, it's off Glebe Road and Wilson Boulevard. Doris Wagner, recognized as the top FBI profiler in the country, retired now. Lost her husband, by the way, in the 9/11 incident. Clairvoyant, she's into astrology. Mediumship, if you forgot what mediumship is, that's where the person talks to the dead. Married Lars 2 years ago. So I should be calling her Doris Nielsen instead of Doris Wagner. Last one is a guest this time, invited by Lars, Olivia Smith, PhD in history at Oxford, teaches at Georgetown University now. Pulitzer Prize winner for a book she wrote on history. Okay, that's background. Pretty quick here, we're going to get rolling. I'll cover randomly a few of the blunders, pointing out 2 or 3 major points. Each chapter covers one blunder. Don't forget that. So all my research is squeezed into each chapter, so there's no fluff in this book. It's all just bottom lines, facts. Yet it's got to be called historical fiction because, you know, the characters are fictional. More thorough coverage is in each chapter. When you read the book, I hope you'll read it, you'll see. So, I mean, there's other blunders that I could have covered, but I just picked out some randomly to give you an idea what it's all about. For instance, there's Bay of Pigs, Pearl Harbor, World War I, why we shouldn't have gone into World War I, for example, assassination of Kennedy, some real interesting things that I think I uncovered there, and Chernobyl, many others, Hurricane Katrina, Gulf oil spill. One thing I do in my research, I have to tell you, is that some writers, authors, when they're walking along the beach, just to compare it to that, and they uncover every shell they walk by and look under it, see what's going on. Well, I uncover every pebble. I really dig deep. And when I dig deep, I find there's something else there. There's got to be something I'm missing. And sure enough, a lot of the times, sometimes it doesn't work, but a lot of the times I've uncovered something that just nobody has ever heard about. And you'll hear a few of those now. Okay, well, let's get rolling with Challenger, which is chapter 16. Again, these are random. Might as well tell you right off, those are 7 wonderful people that should be alive today. As you know, that happened January 28th of 86. Gosh, it doesn't seem like that long ago, but exploded 73 seconds after blast off. And most of you know it was a flaw in the O-rings, but it was known since 1977. See, here's my point, not reported by NASA managers to supervisors. The O-rings were never tested below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, yet launch time, it was 28.9 degrees Fahrenheit. Icicles were 2 feet long on the shuttle's upper level and on the crew's emergency escape path. The engineers were sort of arguing with the team of NASA in Florida. They were in Texas that night, you know, like midnight, telling them, please don't launch. The risk is not worth a launch, quote unquote. They recommended a minimum temperature launch time of 57 degrees. The National Weather Service came up with a report that morning that temperatures may reach an all-time record low. And by the way, the National Weather Service has never distributed a bulletin like that ever before until that late that night. Nobody paid any attention to it. That's where I'm coming from here. Sleeping at the switch, not passing on messages, and you'll see that in a few more of these. Christina McAuliffe's selected, as you know, she was the teacher selected from 11,400 teacher applicants. Think of that. And we lost her on this one. Researching this pretty thoroughly, and there could be people sitting out there now that know more about it than I do. I came full circle back to what Ed McAuliffe, her father, said. This is on page 182, and I'm going to read this. I think he hit a bullseye. He hit the nail on the head. He wrote in his journal, quote, "Krista did not die for NASA or the space program. She died because of NASA and its egos, marginal decisions, ignorance, and irresponsibility. NASA betrayed 7 fine people who deserved to live." I wasn't going to tell you this, but I'll just mention this before we move on to the next blunder. A few days before the launch, Ed told his wife, Corrigan McAuliffe, quote, "You know, if I could, I'd go and take her off of that." And just before the accident, Corrigan began to cry. That kind of a sixth sense feeling they both had about this thing. Okay, chapter 23 is Hitler. This is interesting. Can you flip to that one? There, Cassandra's right on the ball. Thanks. Okay, by the way, this was tough because I wanted to write something about World War II. I'd already written, some pretty good stuff on why we should never have gone into World War I. I think you're going to like that chapter. But what about World War II? See, I didn't want to write anything in this book that had been written before, or documentary films or whatever. So what was it? So thought this thing out. By the way, not much has been written on the failure to assassinate Hitler. Hey, that's it. That's going to be the chapter. So I found out that there are over 40 attempts to assassinate Hitler. Actually, to be honest with you, and this is in the book, there are probably 60. People are flabbergasted when I tell them this. But some of them never got to be an assassination attempt because the SS found out the plot and killed it off before the plot could actually become an act of intent to kill Hitler. Also, the SS didn't want the population to know that anyone would even think of assassinating the Fuhrer. I have a log of all the attempts made on Hitler, all 40 of them. The date, the location, by whom, and a summary. You can see each one of them. Assassination would have saved 31.5 million Europeans and over 85 million World War II deaths. Now, you know about Operation Volkrein, which is well known, von Stauffenberg and all of that. You've read books, you've seen the movie, probably with Tom Cruise, but that was not the best attempt. It's the best well-known one, but not even close to George Elser, E-L-S-E-R. George Elser is my hero of World War II. This guy was tremendous, perfect for this job of setting a bomb off. Carpenter, watchmaker, just perfect. 2 months he stayed overnight in hiding at the Burgerbrau Keller in Munich. I was stationed in Munich for 2 years, and I've been there to the Burgerbrau Keller. I wasn't hiding or anything. I believe I was drinking beer most of the time. Pretty good place. But he was building this platform thing and hiding this bomb, which he had all set to go on. And it was to commemorate, Hitler was there to commemorate the beer hall putsch in 1928, which is very famous. And he did that every year, same day, 2-hour talk, automatic. What happened was a storm came in, a heavy fog. And Hitler started at 8:10 p.m., but he left at 9:12 p.m. rather than staying the extra 40 minutes or so, which would be normal, because the fog was so intense that he wouldn't be able to fly from Munich back to Berlin that night. He'd have to take the train. That's why he left early. Of course, Elsler, not knowing that, the bomb went off on time, killed 8, wounded 65, and actually wounded Eva Braun's father. But let me tell you, if things had gone normal, Hitler would have been blown to pieces. That would have been no more Hitler. That would have done it right there. Hitler, here's something that I found out. This is a little trivia. I found out that, you see, the Russians and us in Berlin. By the way, I was in Berlin for 2 years too. They felt like they had the bones or ashes of Hitler and kind of bragged about it. Matter of fact, Russia was saying, hey, we've got it in our museum. See, all that's incorrect. What really happened was his ashes were taken by a former KGB officer who dressed like a fisherman and went up to this cliff, and there's a big stream below, and dumped Hitler's ashes in that stream. That's what really happened. Now, the only reason I found this out was going into the German Federal Archives and something called the Adolf Hitler Archives. Both of these had about 1/4 inch of dust on them. So nobody really wanted to look at these things. So, but anyway, that's a little trivia for you and sort of interesting. But that's what happens when you turn over all the pebbles on the beach and don't get convinced or get swayed by sort of like, well, what Bill Halal mentioned, misinformation when we were chatting earlier. We get a lot of misinformation, and we got to be smart enough not to abide by that and kind of realize what's really makes sense, because some things don't make sense. 9/11's chapter 3. Okay, there we go. We're familiar with that. This one is pretty frustrating. I really dug deep into this one. Well, I dug deep into all of them, but because I was a little, bothered with this one. I guess I think about those firefighters and policemen, just rushing up those stairways and knowing they're going to save everybody, and the whole thing comes down on them. Just really great people. I think about it every day, just kind of a flashing thought, because I know what was in their minds. We're going to get this thing. We're going to save those people up there. And so it's really sad. But the best way to lead this one off for you is what Madeline Amy Sweeney said. And she's the hostess on American Airlines number 11. Here's a quote by her to her supervisor. Okay, something is wrong. We're in a rapid descent. We're all over the place. I see water. I see buildings. We're flying low. We're flying very, very low. We are flying way too low. Oh my God, we're way too low. Oh my God, and then they crashed in the North Tower. I wasn't going to mention this, but because that says it all. But another favorite sort of hero of mine is Todd Beamer, and you remember him on United Airlines 93 that crashed at Shanksville, Pennsylvania. He said, "Are you guys ready? Okay, let's roll." And then they went up and got those pilots taken care of. 2,996 deaths, 6,000 injured. Think about that. Didn't have to happen. Failure, you can look around, but the bottom line on this one is the FBI and CIA to share information. Jealousy, ego still is prevalent today. Not quite as bad, but it wasn't very good back then. FBI was sitting on their hands. CIA was sleeping at the switch. Kind of bureaucratic rivalries, which is just not acceptable. They didn't connect the dots. There were dots, red flags all over the place. And none of those red flags, or call them dots, weren't connected by the FBI and CIA, or they would have put this thing down. Dots were, those pilots training in Florida and a whole bunch of other things. I outline them quickly in the chapter, but if you put that together, you'd have it. Oh, gee, the World Trade Towers, was bombed underneath years before. I wonder if they're going to try that again. Well, anyway, real eye openers I discovered and passing them on to you. And they're provided in the chapter. Titanic, chapter 28. This was doomed from the beginning. This ship should have arrived at New York Pier 54 with all 2,224 passengers and crew safe. Instead, 1,517 lives were lost. Now, I know some of you have seen movies on Titanic, but there's a lot of things that are unknown. And some of the things I found out, to be honest with you, I talked to a writer, author, who only worked on the Titanic for 20 years, and another one 30 years. And there are a couple of things they didn't know. There's a huge fire in the coal bunker 10 days before the ship's departure. 1,000 degree Fahrenheit fire. According to the stokers down there in the bottom of the ship, it was a raging hell, quote unquote. That fire reduced the strength by 75% on the starboard side. It weakened the hull. The Titanic was reversed in its berth at Southampton so that passengers wouldn't see on the starboard side a 30-foot black heavy mark going along the side of the ship caused by the fire. No mention of the fire to passengers. They weren't allowed to by the captain and the owner of the ship. Unfortunately, the Titanic hit the iceberg on the starboard side. And so that it was so brittle that it just broke up there. There's a lot of things here. First of all, it shouldn't have been launched because it's against policy to have a ship take off with a raging fire in the coal bunker. I cover mistakes that caused the collision with the iceberg. There's two slants to this, but I've never seen it covered this way before. You have to look at two things. They're separate. The collision with the iceberg, what caused that, and mistakes causing the unnecessary loss of lives. No practice on using life preservers, no fire drills, don't want to take up space on the deck because we want that with nice tables and real plush stuff for our rich personnel that are passengers, et cetera, et cetera. Chapter 8, the Indianapolis. Now, some of you, this is your favorite, I know. But why is this a blunder? Well, it's the worst Navy disaster in the Navy's history. That's why I picked that one out. But I know that there's a lot of documentaries on it and films and everything, so I stayed away from all that. Two Japanese torpedoes hit Indy, and it sunk in 12 minutes. 300 sailors and Marines went down. 895 drifted into the Philippine Sea. Now, here's where you get to that little point that maybe caused this whole thing. The officer responsible to track Indy, we call the Indianapolis Indy, did not report that Indy did not arrive on schedule to his superior. They didn't know the Indianapolis was sunk for 4.5 days. And they found out that by accident, small aircraft flew nearby and saw this big oil streak and then in the water, and then saw these sailors swimming around. That's how they learned it. So again, going back to the way I started, dumb decisions, poor communications, lack of leadership, and all those kind of things caused mistakes to culminate in a blunder. So I don't think I mentioned this, but mistakes are like the micro level, the blunders, the macro level. So that's what I call a blunder. Hindenburg, I could have picked that out, but it was kind of an accident. So was the Columbia spacecraft. It's a series of mistakes that have boomerang, and now this umbrella of a blunder with all the mistakes underneath have caused this thing to be a magnificent and unfortunate blunder. So sharks got a lot of them out there in the water. They drank salt water, started hallucinating. They even started killing one another. Exhaustion. And in reviewing a few of these chapters, I just wanted you to have a feel for it, like the airline hostess with 9/11, like the one I'm going to read now. There's a quote, hallucinating. In fact, a lot of them have weapons like knives, and they go so crazy they'd be fighting together and killing one another. Some drank so much salt water that they were seeing things. They'd say the India is down below, and that they'd swim down and a shark would get them. And you could see the sharks eating your comrades. We had a floating cargo net with 15 sailors on it. 10 sharks hit it and all was gone. This went on and on and on. At any given time, you could look out and see big fins swim around and around and around. All of a sudden, you heard a blood-curdling scream, and you look and you see the shark had taken him under. Okay, and it goes on and on to describe the terrible situation. Lusitania, chapter 15, this was May 1st of 1915. Some people might say, when they sunk that with Americans on, how come we didn't go into World War I? Well, we can talk about that. We call Lusitania Lucy. Of the 1,959 passengers, 1,198 died. 35 were babies. Sunk in 18 minutes from a German sub U-20. And I studied that U sub and the captain. And do you know that that captain was so horrified seeing women with their babies going underwater and everything else? He dropped the periscope down and wouldn't let any of his crew see it. But now here's one thing we have to consider on this one. There were 600 tons of explosives aboard, unknown to the passengers. So frankly, it's called illegal hauling of war munitions. So that made Lucy a legitimate target. You can argue both sides, but really that shouldn't have been done. No destroyer escort either for Lusitania. The Room 40, which some of you know about, which is that British high-level secret intelligence group, they did not inform Captain Bill Turner of submarine activity. Guess what? Submarines sank 2 merchant marine ships 2 days in the same area before Lusitania got there. Everybody always has an escort, a destroyer in front and in back, a lot of times, but at least in front. They didn't have one. The other thing is, most all the ships were taking a northern route to Liverpool to avoid the war zone. Lusitania was going straight for Liverpool through the war zone. The German embassy in Washington here warned at risk to travel in the war zone. And that was put out in newspapers. I have a copy of it, of that report. So, you know, don't go on the Lusitania. There's ugly, dark secrets in this one, conspiracies. And I'm going to let you figure out what you think, because I've got a quote by King George V. Here you go. King George V met with Colonel House. Colonel House was Woodrow Wilson's assistant at Buckingham Palace. The king said, suppose they should sink the Lusitania with American passengers aboard. What about that? What about Churchill wanting to get us into World War I, and Churchill would do anything to get us into World War I, because they knew they couldn't win it without us. There's no doubt about it. We're sending all the supplies there. We had hundreds of merchant marine ships sunk by subs trying to get stuff over to Great Britain. I like the Brits, good friends with a lot of them, but boy, they owe the United States an awful lot. American Indians, Chapter 7. Okay, this is a story of betrayal and sorrow. That's the only way I can say that. This is a total disgrace, gang. It really is. If you can check these numbers out, from 1500 to 1900, think of this. Indian population declined from 12 million to 270,000. Think about that. 4 centuries. Over 181 massacres. And Tiger Green, one of my Alpha Team fellows, he has a log on all those massacres. How many were killed, how many women were killed, how many children were killed. It's a real snapshot summary. Over 500 broken treaties. Now here's what I found, and it kept coming back to this from everything I was able to get a hold of. The big problem was an antagonistic attitude towards the Indians from day one. No chance to even say your part that, hey, don't go on this part of the ground. That's our burial ground. Don't tear that up, because nobody cared. Government, military, pioneers, everybody were just antagonistic towards them. And remember, they were here first. They're the first Americans. I mean, it was their land. Greed and selfishness ruled the day. Thomas Jefferson even said, "We will destroy all of them," unquote. General Philip Sheridan in 1869 said, and you've heard this before, that the only good Indians I ever saw were dead. And he destroyed their livelihood via scorched earth policy, just like he did in the South in the Civil War. He used scorched earth there. And that, humbled the Confederates. Slavery, chapter 9. Slaves were victims without rights. This probably could be one of the biggest blunders in history. Terrible. Started in 1501. Now, most writers say slavery started in 1619, but actually that's not correct. If you really look at it, it started in 1501. I know you feel like, gosh, that's a long time ago. 12 million slaves entered the Atlantic slave trade between the 16th and 19th century. 1.5 million died on board ships. Think of that. 10.5 million arrived in the Americas, but they went to other countries too. So, I mean, we weren't the only ones in it. There's like 10 other countries. Okay, inhumane, why it's sort of a blunder. Use of shackles, chains, handcuffs, slave markets, sold at auctions, whippings, branded by irons, chopped off hands, hangings, burned alive, rape, and so on. I read through 600, a little over 600 sayings, quotes, to pick out one or two out of all those that might make you feel what's going on. Here's one. And remember, their English wasn't very good because the masters didn't allow them to read or write, and certainly not to be educated. So they had to sneak these little notes around. And I found a diary that was written by a very big risk taker who wrote on little tiny snippets, like little pieces of newspaper, wallpaper, like 1.5 inch little square. He'd write things in there, then later put it together as a diary. Okay, talking about something awful. You should have been there. The slave owners was shouting and selling chillin' to one man and the mama and papa to another. The slaves cries and takes on something awful. If a woman had lots of chillin', she was sold for more because as a sign she was a good breeder. Of course, they cry. You think they did not cry when they were sold like cattle? I could tell you about it all day, but even then you couldn't guess the awfulness of it. Kevin Bales said something that was pretty good. Quote, slavery is theft, theft of a life, theft of work, theft of any property or produce, theft even of the children a slave might have born. Of course, they were forbidden to read and write, like I told you. And then I told you about finding like little diaries. There's not very many in unpolished English. 17th and 18th century. Okay, here's my overview on this. And I haven't read this anywhere, so this is kind of my own thinking, that 17th and 18th century, African people were kidnapped. I mean, really, and sent to American colonies against their will. So I haven't read anything about the fact that, think about it, African countries were deprived of their most healthy and talented men and women from their countries. And so that would affect the future of that entire country. So, it's hard to make that up. It's just like in war, when we lose a generation of men and boys, they're gone forever. Now, here's my final point on this one. Because people say, okay, why did you include slavery as a blunder? Good question. And I thought about it and made a little stubby pencil note on why I think it is. Because instead of greed and selfishness, which enable masters to have a free labor force, it should have been an organized, structured workforce. Paid salaries, not have to be too high, but an ability to be educated, allowed to read and write. Well, why not? Why beat them to death like this picture here? Why not have them come in and organize them as a workforce and have it organized instead of so cruel and inhumane per the chapter's title? Okay, next. This one will completely shock you. Well, get ready, hold on to your seat. A lot of people have never heard of this. Exercise tiger. The biggest fiasco of all of World War II. This is a dress rehearsal at Lyme Bay, England. This is Eisenhower's idea for the location and to make it a live fire dress rehearsal for the invasion of Utah Beach, which was going to occur about 5 weeks later. Now, if you're good at math, follow this number. 749 soldiers and sailors were killed by friendly fire and German U-boats. 197 were killed at Utah Beach. Again, 749 killed in a rehearsal for an invasion where, and I hate to say only, 197 were killed. Almost 4 times as many were killed in the friendly exercise as the invasion of Utah Beach. The reason that Lyme Bay was chosen was because the beach and the surroundings mirrored Utah Beach pretty closely. The way that we lost so many people were that in a flotilla of LSTs, those are landing ship tanks, the last 2 LSTs were sunk by German subs. Guess what? The German submarine base was at Cherbourg, right across there. Almost see the LSTs. So a couple of subs went over there, picked off the last 2. No destroyer escort. Again, should have had a destroyer escort at the rear of that mile-long flotilla and one in front. Basic, fundamental tactics, strategy. Okay, basically, there was a time change. About 5 minutes before all this was to kick off, Admiral Moore made a change. Wasn't really his fault, but it never got out to the British, who were providing naval gunfire to when the ships did go around and the troops are landing on the beach, they were being hit by British naval gunfire, killing our own people. Now, here's one thing that's interesting for you. This was kept secret for 40 years. If you lost your husband or your uncle or brother in this, no one was allowed to say anything about it for 40 years. And I have a quote. Water was frigid, 42 degrees. Hypothermia set in quickly. We pulled around floating dead bodies. Our buddies, some were screaming, "Help me, we're gonna die." Others cried, "Mom." One ensign swam under a floating mass of burning oil to get a raft for us, saved our lives. There was no plan to retrieve survivors. They just drowned or burned to death. Hundreds burned to death. I saw them and could do nothing. We were ordered to leave the bodies where they were, so our LST had to zigzag to keep from running over the floating bodies. That haunts me to this day. The wounded soldiers were to be treated, but no questions were to be asked, and no histories taken by the doctors. Anyone who talked about the casualties were to be court-martialed. A lot of things happen here. Again, no training in the use of life preservers. They put them on wrong, floated upside down and drowned. It's really kind of goes on and on. Okay, we're at the end. And this is just gives you a flavor. I wanted to close with one thing. A really fantastic person that I met along this journey of research was Laura Bolton. God bless her. She's the director of Exercise Tiger. And I guess she's well in her 80s. And she didn't know for 50 years, 1994, that her uncle, Sergeant Lewis Bolton, had died. He's at the bottom of the English Channel. Last 2 points on, I guess, near the last page of the book is something I call the bottom line. This is written by me. These blunders form shadows for the future, and we have unfortunately inherited these shadows formed by the past blunders. Shame on those responsible for the filling of graves of indispensable, respectable people. May those people who passed on, all of them, forever rest in peace. That's by me, the author. Now, the last thing, special closing comment from the Alpha team to you, the reader. Aristotle said the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Our team members, the parts, have been connected together during this extremely earnest research journey. That has allowed us to more effectively, as a whole, to provide the real truths to you as part of the deserving public. Hopefully, we have imparted this to you, the reader, who counts the most. Respectfully, Lars, Doris, Tiger, Brenda, Olivier. Okay, hey, listen, I'm sure glad you all tuned in today. And if there's any comments or questions, and we can't cover them all, if there's any, you can always email me too. So, Cassandra?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for that, Chuck. I know I'm eager to read the rest of what I haven't already. Does anybody in the group have a question? It looks like maybe Dr. Simon, I see your hand up. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Yeah, Chuck, that was just a terrific presentation. My question is when the hijackers were training for the 9/11, there were stories about them taking flying lessons, and they never asked the to take complete flying lessons. They only wanted to know how to fly the plane,
Right.
not land the plane.
Yeah.
And at one time, they had trouble with some small plane in Florida. They left it on the runway and walked away.
Yeah.
Were not these things ever investigated?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I've got that covered in the book too. That's one of the red flags. If you're an instructor, I mean, that's one of the many red flags. I think I've covered them all in there. Some of them will be eye openers, but on that one, you're right. I'm glad you brought that up.
Chuck,
As an instructor, if down there in Florida, and that's where that happened that you're talking about, and also out in Arizona, I think. If they weren't worried about landing and didn't want those instructions on landing, which they said that we just want to know how to take off, that would kind of put a red flag up if I was one of the instructors and say, what's going on here, and blow the whistle early.
Chuck,
But see, these red flags were up. You're right. That's just one of them. And see, a lot of these things that are mistakes, if caught early, could keep it in the micro set and don't let it blow up into the macro set and become a blunder and have it go into those two buildings up there in New York, the Pentagon and Sharksville. It's just things like that. The fellow not reporting the Indianapolis, not tracking that thing, not passing that on to superior. Pearl Harbor, same thing. There were indications that there's hey sir, there's an awful lot of planes coming our way, it seems like. Don't bother me, I'm going to breakfast. And then the other one who said, hey, this little submarine came in, a mini sub, and that's an indication of something, isn't it? And his supervisor was drunk. That was at Pearl Harbor. So you're right, David. That's one of them, and that's a big one. You hit on a big one.
Chuck, I have some information for you. I don't know how to raise my hand, so am I coming across? Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, you are.
Okay, so on 9/11, we have a resource there at GW, Paul Rosenzweig. He's one of our legal professors, and he did a lot of work on the computers and everything with this 9/11, and we could have put everything together if we let the different computer systems talk to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like those three things I led off with at the beginning. One of them was poor communications. That's one of them. You hit on a good one there. Poor communications like World War I. Here's the problem that you run into. And a lot of people listening right now know a lot more than I do, but I speak Vietnamese, French, and a little bit of English. But when you talk to someone in a foreign country and you have an interpreter, that interpreter can't express exactly your feelings because it's a little cold, and can't really, and nothing against the interpreters, but can't accurately explain what you're saying. So you lose a little bit in there. And a lot of this happened in World War I. And that's why instead of it being Albania and Serbia, it became a continental war, which the British didn't want. There was no need. It should have been a third Balkan War. Shouldn't have been involving France and Great Britain. They didn't want it. But see, there's another example of the communication. So, and then the computer with 9/11 at GW. So yeah, that's big stuff you hit on there.
I have another point. From the standpoint of the slave trade, a lot of the chiefs of the tribes in Africa sold their own people to
Yeah.
the slave traders.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you know, a lot of them did that. And matter of fact, I guess a lot of them, from what I've researched that pretty deep, that they actually sent them away, you know. But what you're doing is you're stripping a country of its best people and sending them on ships to other countries. There was about 12 of them in the slave trade then. We were one of the bigger ones. And so they're still trying to recover from that. Nobody's hit on this that I know of. But you know, when you deplete yourself of a generation of people, it's, I mean, not to take the German side by any means, but look at what happened to them. You know, they had all their young people and older people killed, you know, trying to fight the Russians and us, and totally depleted, you know, and we hurt from it. Soviet Union hurt from it. So I see a similarity between that and Africa losing, again, I repeated it before, but they're more top-notch, healthy women and men, and it's kind of left to be run by who, you know, so.
I want to take a moment and recognize Professor Gutierrez. I don't believe he was with us when Provost Bracy opened the event, so I do believe he's on now. So we just want to welcome you to the Society of the Emeriti. Welcome to us. We're glad you could join us.
Well, thank you so much. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I'm at my place near Gettysburg, and sometimes internet is hard to get up here. But actually, I was going to make a comment on the carpenter who tried to kill Hitler. I think his name was Eisler or Essler, something like that. The peculiar thing was that he was not executed immediately, but he was kept at Dachau, and he was finally executed in 1945, in April 45, just before Dachau was liberated. So why he was kept alive? Maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Oh, you're talking about George Elsler?
Right.
Yeah, you know, that was terrible what Hitler did, because 1 week before Hitler committed suicide, he called down to Dachau and had George Elsler put to death, you know, just out of spite. That's all it was. Yeah, I uncovered that. So you're right too. That was terrible. And Elsler told the guard just before he was executed that, you know, I know that I went against the grain, but I would have done it over again. I'm proud of what I tried to do, you know. And then they executed him. Great fellow, the salt of the earth, you know. Came from a small town in Germany, that southwest Germany, where he, you know, that carpentry work and learning clocks, you know, clockwork was perfect for what he had to do. That would have been a big play in World War II, because Hitler would have been in pieces. I doubt if you'd have found anything from him, because the bomb was set up underneath the podium in a special hidden compartment, and it would have blown him to smithereens.
Although ironically, today there would have been a Hitler statue in just about every town in Germany.
Yeah. And also, I've often thought that's true. Every place would have had a statue and flags and everything, and Great Britain would be called Northern Germany, and the rest would be Southern Germany. They might allow the British flag to fly under the swastika Nazi flag for continuity, but otherwise it would have been the Republic of Germany, North and South. You're right. Statues, flags all over the place. Glad you brought that point up. That was a good one about Essler. I didn't know anybody really knew the name, so that's good. He deserves a lot of credit. He really does. Painstaking work that he did to try to save all of us. Well, are you new? Are you new to GW?
No, I wasn't for 20 years. I was with
Okay. All right.
medical school. I'm a new emeritus.
Oh, I guess, I guess you arrived late. I thought you were one of the new ones that.
Oh, no. I think that some of the guys there, like Dr. Simon and Dr. Schwartz, can say awful things about me.
But we do have a couple of new people, right, Cassandra?
Yes, actually, Professor Gutierrez is a recent awardee of emeritus as of last year.
Yeah. Good.
Yes. So for everybody that is still on and joining us, I'm going to be sending a survey out as I normally do, and we'd like to offer you a copy of Dr. Toftoy's book. So if you're interested, please just let me know in the survey. Does anybody else have any questions before I close this out today? Well, thank you everybody for coming. I hope everybody has a good holiday. Our next session when we come back is February 11th. We are going to be hearing once again from our favorite Diane Klein, our Associate Professor of History and Classics. Her talk is titled The Refugee Crisis in Classical Athens, the Plague, the Peloponnesian War, and the End of the Golden Age. So I look forward to hopefully seeing everybody in person soon. I'll tell you that we're still doing a month-to-month decisions, but hopefully we all pray that we can be back together face-to-face and eating that wonderful lunch very soon.
I think I disappointed everybody today because this was supposed to be the first one that was going to have in-person lunch. Everybody's got that
hoped.
lunch on their mind.
We hoped, but as I've said before many a times, I don't think the
right.
provost wants to be the first one to have a super spreader. So we're going to let somebody else at GW take that.
Well, like I said, just to coordinate everything, I went to see Cassandra a couple of days ago and sign those books that maybe you all will get. And there's a lot of checks there. They're doing a good job at the school, really are.
Okay, everyone, well, have a happy holiday. Good to see everybody.